In the new cinematic, Xal'atath and the Void gets beaten back last minute as a bunch of light warriors come marching through the sunwell itself. Now, my initial reaction was that Turalyon finally brought the army of the light that you saw back in Legion, but based on all the other hints, it appears that the Light Emperor Thoradin the Ninth, the half-elf, half-human guy, sent his entire force to save his kingdom of origin, Quel'thalas. Not only do these guys look Arathi, but they seem to be wielding the flame light version, and this in fact means big things are coming. Not only might we see the Emperor himself and this light army in the expansion, but we might get the Arathi Empire as patch content with this entire new continent of highly advanced half-elf, half-human civilization. So what is everything we currently know? If you wanted anything Warcraft related, Gamido has the best deals on the market that you can get with my link below. You can get almost every other game's software, and they also just added mobile top-ups for all your favorite mobile games with the craziest prices. You can also use my code DORON to get yet another discount, so click my link and get the best deals at Gamido. We just got the Midnight Cinematic and the Midnight gameplay video, and as I said in my initial reaction, it was quite surprising. We kinda knew what would come in Midnight as soon as they announced it 2 years ago. We had a general outline, but it didn't turn out the way most of us expected. Now, the cinematic itself has gotten a mixed reception because on one side it is good in the fact that we're getting battles, more action, it is actually foreshadowing for what is to come, there is some storyline, it isn't just a random cinematic view. On the other hand, people really didn't like the art style, which I do think is actually quite a bit weird and unbefitting the elves, and it was a bit cliche in a way, but we did get some very large reveals. So based on the articles and all the official information, Quel'thalas was mainly restored post-TBC. Now it is under the Void Invasion, but the Void Invasion is actually coming from the sky, not through the sunwell itself, as I personally believed. Initially I thought it would be used as a portal like the sunwell, but I think the reason that Xal'atath is after it was so that what just happened wouldn't happen, and that is the light would use it to come and counter the void. The sunwell itself is actually the biggest light source on Azeroth, so it's actually a problem for Xal'atath, as after all, the void's biggest enemy out there is the light. You remember the lore when a Naru sacrificed himself and managed to banish Dementia, so it so far seems like the main counter to them is wildly effective, sort of how the light was super effective against the undead back in the day. Like, the void really doesn't want to fight the light. Rambling aside, just from the video, I want to talk about the big turning point to the cinematic and the big reveal. It was not really a reveal. The light guys coming was the big reveal, but they kind of left it on a cliffhanger because they didn't show who is actually coming. Like, these were just silhouettes, they didn't really have a close-up on them. In my initial reaction, it was like 5 minutes after it came out on the live stream, I thought it was Turalyon, but now looking at all the little videos, the official articles, the images that people analyzed, it seems very likely, highly likely that the guys that arrived through the sunwell are actually the Light Arathi. It seems like the Emperor Thoradin the Ninth is coming, and that Renilash, the final battle of the Void and the Light, is happening now in Midnight in Quel'thalas. Now, it is a bit hard to predict here because we kind of have two armies of light. We actually have even more than two. We have the Cosmological one that we saw back in Legion, where Turalyon is the commander, and we have the highly advanced light army that lives on an undiscovered continent on Azeroth, the Arathi guys, and they're also highly advanced. If you guys actually follow the little lore books, like, this isn't common knowledge, it was hinted that these guys are incredibly advanced and powerful, and that they actually potentially had expeditions outside of Azeroth, so they seem to be a cosmological light army themselves as well. Like, these are not just paladin humans, like, this is not a silver hand. Now, the third light army is Yrel, that seems mainly evil, and it is the light army that forcefully took over Altered Draenor, seemingly destroyed the planet, but we don't know how connected they are to the actual army of the light, the first one I talked about. Now, here are the hints. So, Liatrin is calling for help, and what appears to be a human hand lays on her shoulders, and then a bunch of mysterious figures come behind her and use light fire-like spells to banish Xal'atath and to stop her momentum. So, as I said, my initial thoughts were that this was Turalyon, and from the gameplay, Turalyon seems to be present in the raid, so he is an active figure, he is still around. However, every other hint points that these are the Arathi. It's very likely that the hand is Anduin because we know he was really curious about the Arathi, and very likely he could have been the one that called them and convinced them, and he is a light user himself. Second is that the figures do actually look like the Arathi. I mean, they got the shields, the hammers, the very human Arathi-like aesthetics. The Yrel one and the other Army of the Light are mainly Draenei and various other races, and they look a little bit different, especially in silhouettes. Another hint is that they use fire-like spells to attack, and we know the Arathi use this sacred flame, a mix of fire and the light, so literally everything kinda matches right. Now, first question you might ask, why would the Arathi humans come to save the elves in the last minute in Quel'thalas? And this is actually the biggest bit of evidence, and that is because the Arathi guys are not humans. These are half humans, half elves, and they actually originate from Quel'thalas. So they kind of returned a few thousand years later to save their own people. If you remember the lore, after the Troll War, a group of humans and Quel'thalas elves, mainly followers of the light, sailed to an unknown continent, and they called themselves the Arathi Empire. Later, we learned that they became incredibly technologically advanced and powerful, and they also became super connected to the light, like fanatical in a way. Now, their leader, based on the lore that we got in the War Within, is a guy called Thoradin the Ninth that is hundreds of years old, very likely an elf himself or a half-elf, which would explain his long lifespan. Throughout the War Within, it was constantly kind of swinging both ways, whether this guy is an evil fanatic, a zealot, or a good guy, and that still hasn't been fully cleared out, but it is leaning a bit more towards the good side. However, the Arathi prophecy that began in the War Within matches this perfectly. Apparently, Thoradin got a vision and sent his guys to Khaz'dagar, but he didn't do it to take over some underground ruins and fight the Nerubians, but because he heard from the light that the Void is coming to some insane battle, like the Ragnarok of Warcraft, the end times, and he was getting ready for it. I think it became pretty obvious this was the case when the entire world darkened. As you guys could see from the teaser, both Khaz'dagar and Stormwind became dark, like pretty much the entire sky of Azeroth darkened, and these Void guys just started falling like rain from the sky. If this is not Renilesh, then I don't really know what is. One of the arguments with Turalyon is, why would he come from the sunwell itself? I mean, he is on Azeroth himself. I mean, he's very close. The Light Army travels via ships, via the little Eredar-like ships, and he'd probably come immediately when the invasion happened. He wouldn't wait until the last moment. He would probably come from the south. The Arathi theory makes more sense, as these guys are like their distant cousins that heeded their call last moment, and they're also on a continent, so they can't really travel conventionally. Like we know they're kind of hidden on a continent. Now, this in itself will be incredibly interesting. There's so many implications. I know a lot of Midnight seems underwhelming on first glance just from the announcement, but there is actually big potential. The zones we were told about, the Haranir and the Void zones, are the initial ones coming through the release, but you know, we will get 2 more zones in the expansion itself, so 12.1 and 12.2. So it is possible one of them will be the Upper Eastern Kingdoms, the other could be Valoran, like this place where the Arathi could be, as that would be like the perfect patch content. On the other hand, there is a possibility that these are just the Farin Lothar guys coming in the small expedition from Khaz'dagar, and the connection may be Beledar through the Sunwell, as both seem light-based, but I don't know if these forces are big or powerful enough, honestly. I mean, furthermore, Midnight was advertised as this giant, like, final battle between the Light and the Void, and here we're talking about the Army of the Light versus the entire Void, not just a random underground expedition. In all likelihood, I think we're looking at all the armies of the light coming to Azeroth, Turalyon, the Emperor, and I think there is a possibility that they might even call on Yrel to repay the debt that she owes us for her managing to take over Draenor. Thanks for watching. Check out my initial reaction to the announcement by clicking on the screen, and check out my video on real world history and the Roman Empire that I've recorded live on site in Malta by clicking on the screen as well. See you next time!